After my wife, 35, and I, 37, had our first baby together, things started to go downhill. I worked full time and occasionally worked late or had to bring work home with me. I'd still help with the baby as much as possible. My wife worked full time too, but her job was way more laid back and had different hours. Her boss even let her bring the baby to work. Now that's a nice job. She told me I lost all the passion in our relationship and that I didn't give her the attention or love that she required. I tried explaining that my job required a lot of brain power, and I felt like any attention I'd offer her wouldn't be good enough anyway. Like her bar was set too high, and by trying, I would prove I was a failure to her. This went on for some time, and we eventually stopped talking for 3 weeks in a row. During that time, she went away to visit her older daughter from another marriage. While she was there, she tried telling me we need to talk, and I said no thank you because I was so tired of always being in trouble with her and never being what she expected me to be. So our awkward silence continued even after I picked her up from the airport. We had an argument about it at home and sort of made it up, but even though we were talking again, it wasn't the same. She started getting really dressed up in some sexy outfits and just told me she was going out with friends/family. On the first time she went out, she didn't return until 6 a.m. I yelled and cussed at her for being so selfish and staying out that late when we had a baby to care for. I don't remember what her excuses were at that time, only that I was becoming increasingly suspicious of her behavior. Another time, I decided to surprise her and meet them at the restaurant when I was off work. When I got to the restaurant, no one I knew was there, and when I called her, she said they decided to go somewhere else, but wouldn't tell me where. How odd. She went out a few more times before I put a tracker on her car. The next time she told me she was going to work, it didn't feel right to me, like she was too happy. Something told me to discreetly take her house key back before she left, so I did. After a few hours, I tried calling her several times with no response. She finally returned my call, but it sounded like she was in bathroom. I asked her where she was, and she said she was at work. I checked the GPS and it said she was in hotel. I was seeing red as I drove to the hotel and found her car parked in front. I waited about 15 minutes until she came out with some guy. I got close and snapped some really good pictures on my phone. Then I got up in their faces and screamed at them, calling her several names. You don't sleep with someone until divorce papers are presented, and we never discussed that. She said she had been telling me for over a year and a half at that point that I needed to be more attentive and invested in her. Since I hadn't been, she considered herself single. I told her the world doesn't revolve around her every need and desire for attention. It would have been easier for me to show her love if I didn't feel like I was going to fail her unrealistic expectations. Then I looked at her lover. He was standing there sheepishly, probably praying I didn't recognize him, but I did. I spat at him and screamed, asking how long he thought it would take for him to find a new job. He was my wife's boss. As he stood there dumbfounded, I snapped one more picture of him and my wife. I asked them what they thought the company's course of action would be upon being informed about their affair. They shook their heads and looked down, visibly ashamed. I know this was an involuntary response. As I walked back to my car, they both tried telling me to stop and think things through. That was a laugh. I drove to their office, and it didn't take long for me to have a special meeting with her boss's boss. He didn't find it so amusing that they'd both called off that day, claiming to be sick. He decided to fire both of them. First, he called my wife, and as I sat there, I really enjoyed hearing her squeal and freak out on the other line. On the way to file for divorce, my wife called me in a screaming panic, saying I needed to stop acting so rashly and think before sabotaging her reputation. I asked her if she ever stopped for 1 second and thought about what I needed or how I felt. She was quiet. I hung up and used my phone to post pictures of her and her boss on Facebook. My phone started blowing up with questions from her friends, family, and colleagues. She tried calling me again several times. After I got the divorce papers, I returned home to find her looking for her house key. She immediately started crying to me, saying she had nowhere to stay. She thought she'd be able to stay with someone, friend, family, colleague, but all of them were so disappointed by her actions that she was cut off. Only because I wasn't purely evil, I arranged for her to sleep in our garage while I slept inside the house with our baby. In exchange for this, she had to find a job and start paying me rent. So just like that, she went from living in a payment-free house, having a job, supportive family, friends, and husband to nothing. At first, she struggled to find a job and was forced to sell some of her expensive treasures, most of them gifts for me, to afford the rent. She eventually found a job that she hated but kept going because she had no other options. When the divorce was finalized, she was told she had 30 days to find her own place. She moved into a trailer and continued working her sucky job while she got visitation with our daughter. She actually seems remorseful now for demanding and expecting so much from me. She understands how hard life is when you have a job that doesn't cater to your needs and an unappreciative, or in her case, non-existent, spouse. Wow, OP. Thank you so much for sharing your story. There's many valuable things for people to learn from it. Spouses must be selfless and consider what their spouse needs or wants more than their own desires. When two people do this for each other, it turns into a beautiful partnership. I think you handled this in such a way that showed her what she did wrong and gave her the karma she deserved. She knew what she was doing when she went behind your back. If she considered herself single, she should have filed for divorce instead of starting an affair with her boss. Now for today's second story. My wife, 37, of 5 years, suddenly had a dramatic increase in her sex drive and I, 33, loved it. Trust me when I say that I took every opportunity one could to help her out. I worked full-time and she attended classes at college part-time. One day, while I was at work, my wife sent me pictures of a puddle of water and a leak that started in the house. I told her to call a friend of mine that was a plumber since I was busy at work. I didn't hear anything for hours but didn't notice because I was really busy. When I pulled into the driveway, I was surprised to see his car was still there. I entered the house and he was walking down the stairs, followed by my wife. They both looked extremely cheeky and pleased with themselves the second before they saw me. That's when my wife lost color in her skin and started stammering. I cut her off to ask where the leak was because I thought it had been in the kitchen. My friend told me while he was there he wanted to check for leaks upstairs as well. It made sense enough that I let him leave, but my wife started acting super weird. That night, she didn't feel frisky, which was really unlike her. During the next 2 weeks, she was more distant than usual and snapped at me when I asked who she was texting so much. She added a password on her phone and didn't want to come with me to a family reunion. Well, I'm no dummy and I decided to confront my friend the plumber. I arranged to meet him for lunch at a diner on my work break. I don't think I anticipated how horrible I'd feel after this because I didn't return to work. When we sat down, he was super nervous even though we usually met for meals to catch up every once in a while. I decided to pretend I already knew whatever it was he was so nervous about me finding out. When I said I knew what happened and just needed to hear it from him, I started recording on my phone. He was terrified. He started looking around, breathing heavily, like he wasn't sure if I was going to lunge at his throat. He told me what happened that day. He fixed the leak while my wife hovered close by, wearing nothing but a short nitrous. She asked him a lot of questions, which eventually led to inviting him to check out a potential leak upstairs. When they got up there, she undressed completely and laid on our bed. She asked him to inspect her, and he couldn't resist. His head dropped onto the table, sobbing so loudly that other people in the diner stared at us. I left immediately. From what he was telling me, this was my wife's scheme of seduction. I was still really pissed at him, but I couldn't risk having charges pressed against me for beating him up and karma would begin as soon as he lost his job. I returned home to find my wife enjoying the luxury of a house I provided for her while she did homework for schooling that I paid for. Her life was about to drastically change. Since I bought it, I took her laptop and smashed it right in front of her. She screamed and asked why I did that and what was going on. I told her that since she seduced and fucked my friend and her plumber, she wasn't going to be my wife or live here anymore. She immediately started sobbing because she knew she was caught. She tried apologizing, saying she messed up and wouldn't ever do it again. I told her I wasn't a blindly trusting idiot and that she broke her wedding vows to me, which can't be forgiven or repaired. I needed a wife I could trust to be in her home without me, and that wasn't her anymore. She sobbed and begged while I dumped all her stuff on our yard and porch. She called her best friend for help. When she arrived, my wife told her what was going on, and once she heard the story, she decided she didn't want to help my wife and left. Her friend knew what a good husband I was and that she was a damn fool. This woman was going to become a dependent to whoever elected to help her. So my wife called a classmate she didn't know very well begging for help, this poor girl would become the sucker. After she helped my cheating wife get all her stuff into her car, she took her back to her small apartment, and my wife started leeching off of her. Meanwhile, I filed for divorce and stopped paying for her schooling. Of course, as soon as she was dropped from the program, she left voicemails on my phone, a majority of which were inaudible. She was extremely upset, and her life was crumbling all around her. She told me she didn't know how she was going to survive anymore. All I could think was good. I wasn't sure if it made me evil, but it did make me proud of myself. I didn't lose my cool beyond what I was entitled to and filed for divorce without hesitation. I knew I couldn't trust her the same way ever again. Eventually, the poor girl my wife leeched off of for many months had enough. She kicked her out the same way I did, by leaving all her stuff outside. Hilarious. Ever since then, my now ex-wife has been sleeping on people's couches, and each time she moves unexpectedly, she loses more of her belongings. I guess it's a struggle to find a car or job without a stable place to live. Maybe she's learned her lesson and won't cheat on anyone ever again. Wow, OP. That is a terrible thing to have to go through. I am so sorry she chose to you like this. You trusted her to remain loyal, but she betrayed you by seducing a man you trusted and allowed in your home. What she did was inconceivable, and she certainly did not deserve to have you paying for her schooling or providing her a home. I believe you made the right decision to divorce her. Trust is hard enough to build between two people, but even harder after a betrayal like this. Because you made the harder decision to divorce, you have a chance to heal and build trust with someone else. The events of that fateful day will fade into a foggy memory, but your new life and love will be prominent in your everyday life. I wish you exactly that, a life full of unconditional and untainted love. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's story.